We know that this is your money, not the government's, and we know that you know best how to spend it.
What you saw and heard at the top of this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First are clips of two people who could very well be challenging for the United States Senate seat that is up for re-election in 2026. Obviously, protests that erupted earlier this week at U.S. Congressional Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's town hall. The second clip that we saw and heard was some very brief comments from Governor Brian Kemp, also earlier this week as he signed into law Georgia's largest income tax cut in state history. Today is Friday, April 18th, 2025, and this is Political Update on Atlanta News First and AtlantaNewsFirst.com. I'm Tim Darnell, joined by my friend and colleague, Rick Folbaum. Rick, we saw two widely disparate scenes at the top of the clip. The protests and the arrests that were made at Marjorie Taylor Greene's Cobb County Town Hall made national headlines. Also, Governor Brian Kemp this week, as I said, signed into law the largest income tax cut in the history of Georgia. Looking ahead, as we always try to do, Governor Kemp is signing his long-awaited, very hard-fought lawsuit reform, judicial reform, also known as tort reform package. That is happening on Monday, April 21st. These two political officials seem to be kind of heading in opposite directions in terms of positive publicity, negative publicity, and controversy.
They certainly do. You know, and it's interesting that Republican leaders in Washington had suggested to its members not to hold any in-person town hall meetings because so many of them were getting contentious. People showing up, and not just Democrats who were showing up at these events. Actual Republican voters are giving some of their Republican elected officials a hard time about their support for these policies that are being put in place by President Trump and Elon Musk, these policies that are shrinking the size of the federal government and leading to cuts in service that a lot of people are very unhappy with. And so the Republican leadership had said, you know what, in order to avoid these kinds of embarrassing confrontations, maybe you shouldn't hold any in-person town halls. Well, I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene heard that and said, well, you know what, that's my invitation to hold something in person, because while a lot of lawmakers might try to avoid conflict and contention, it seems to be Marjorie Taylor's calling card. Marjorie Taylor Greene seems to really enjoy that kind of attention. She has ever since she stepped onto the political stage here in Georgia and nationally. She's made a name for herself, a reputation for herself as someone who has courted this kind of controversy, and she seems to thrive on it. And she got exactly what she wanted this week in Cobb County by holding that event there. We know that there were some arrests. There were actually some people who were tased as a result of their protests at this event. We should mention that there were a lot of supporters for Congresswoman Greene who showed up in support of her, and there were peaceful protests that took place outside the venue where there were no issues, no problems at all, but there were some confrontations inside the town hall space itself, and that, of course, as you said, made national headlines. On the flip side, we look at Governor Kemp. And here is someone who I think very methodically is laying out for himself a path to really wherever he wants to go politically, whether that's the U.S. Senate or even beyond. I think that he has his sights set perhaps on national office as well. And I think The reason why I say that is because, you look at these legislative victories that he is now able to tick off. You mentioned the income tax package. You mentioned the cut package. You mentioned the tort reform bill. So many of these legislative priorities that Governor Kemp laid out when he began his second term have really come to fruition. The Republican legislature here in Atlanta able to hand him these victories, while at the same time he is appealing and has made a history of appealing to more moderates and centrists within the Republican Party, independent voters, and even some conservative Democrats who might like some of his policies when it comes to these tax breaks, and when it comes to, for example, raises for school teachers. That is not something that you typically hear Republican politicians going after, but that was one of Governor Kemp's promises and one that he was also able to keep. So you think about political ads in his future where he'll be able to tick off some of these accomplishments, and he really does lay out a very good case for himself, whether he wants to run for the Senate or really whatever he wants to do.
And let's talk about the Senate race for a little bit. We have seen tons of speculation that Governor Kemp could possibly challenge incumbent Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff in 2026. Jon Ossoff so far is coming up on the end of his first term in the U.S. Senate. He obviously used a very hotly contested 6th District congressional race a few years ago. At that time, was running for the open 6th congressional district seat here in Metro Atlanta against Republican Karen Handel after Tom Price resigned early in Donald Trump's first presidential term to become the U.S. Housing and Health and Human Services Secretary, I should say. Jon Ossoff started his career really here in the Metro Atlanta area, was unsuccessful in his first bid for elective office, but that base translated very well in 2020 when he was elected to his first term in the U.S. Senate. Marjorie Taylor Greene has mentioned that, or speculation has surrounded her, that if Governor Brian Kemp chooses not to challenge for the Senate next year, that she could be a contender for it. She may be a contender for governor, depending on how some of the other candidates shake out. But it was interesting, we saw a report from Axios earlier this week that on Monday in Atlanta, Governor Kemp reportedly met with Senate Majority Leader John Thune out of South Dakota and U.S. Senator Tim Scott, just right across the border in South Carolina, who's chair of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Certainly seems like he's laying the groundwork for possible U.S. Senate race.
Well, I mean, the fact that these two gentlemen, who are both very powerful Republican senators, the fact that they came to Atlanta rather than Governor Kemp going to meet them for lunch in Washington, I think that really tells you everything you need to know about the Republican Party and the fact that it really likes Governor Kemp as a candidate for this Senate seat, as someone who could challenge Jon Ossoff. I think that they are looking at him as a potential future star in the party on a national scale, and them coming here to Washington, Thune and the senator from Florida, Scott, coming down here to meet with Governor Kemp. I mean, really what they're doing is they're courting him and gauging his interest and trying to sort of put some feelers out and to let him know how much support he could expect to get from them should he officially announce his candidacy for the U.S. Senate. They control the purse strings as far as the amount of money that will be funneled into these various races around the country. And so I have no doubt that that during that lunch meeting, they let Governor Kemp know that should he decide to enter the race, that he could expect backing, both verbal backing, but also financial backing from the Republican Party on a national level.
Turning our attention from the U.S. Senate race, which will be obviously hotly contested in 2026, we are talking about Governor Brian Kemp wrapping up his second term as in at the state capitol as a Georgia governor. Georgia governors here in the state are obviously term limited, meaning we have a wide open and what will sure to be a nationally watched governor's race in 2026. We are anticipating over the next several months Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones perhaps entering the race. It was very interesting that we've already seen one state senator, Blake Tillery, from Vidalia in southeast Georgia, filing paperwork to perhaps run for lieutenant governor. Speculation about Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Attorney General Chris Carr is the only officially announced Republican candidate so far, or candidate of any kind, for governor. We were talking earlier this week about some of the topics we would discuss in today's edition of Political Update for Friday, April 18th, 2025. Last week, a week and a half or so ago, former Atlanta mayor, one-term Atlanta mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, indicated to a couple of media outlets and on social media that she is pondering a gubernatorial bid. I don't recall any former mayor of Atlanta ever running for governor. What's your take on this? She had one term in the office, chose not to run for re-election, and you and I have talked off the record behind the scenes a lot. Incumbents in Georgia typically get re-elected whenever they so choose. Keisha Lance Bottoms chose not to seek what was almost certain to be a second Atlanta term as Atlanta mayor, and now she might be considering a gubernatorial bid.
Well, if we think back to when former Mayor Bottoms made that decision, I think that it was at a time when we were expecting a new Democratic administration in Washington, and there was a lot of speculation that she was going to play an important role in the Biden administration. Now, that never really came to fruition. She did do some work for the Biden administration. She did a lot of television appearances on behalf of the administration. She moved down to Washington and worked there for some time before moving back here to Georgia. But clearly she has an itch to get back onto the scene, politically speaking, and she showed up at an event this week at the airport celebrating the 100th birthday of Hartsfield Jackson, and all but said, "I'm running," and an official announcement will be coming soon. All of this is very interesting, though, because it comes only a few weeks after we learned that Lucy McBath, another Democrat, a sitting congresswoman from the 6th Congressional District, who announced that she was running for governor, decided to back away from this bid. At the time, she said it was because of her husband's recent cancer diagnosis, and she wanted to devote her time to him and taking care of him. And of course, all of that makes perfect sense. But then you hear about Keisha Lance Bottoms and her eagerness to jump into this race, and you wonder if there was some kind of jockeying behind the scenes that may have led to Lucy McBath stepping back to give Keisha Lance Bottoms the opportunity to move in and to be seen as a front runner for that Democratic nomination. That's speculation. Obviously, I don't have any inside information on that, but it's certainly something that we have seen in the past where politicians from the same political party, sort of decide whose turn it is, and perhaps it was decided that Keisha Lance Bottoms had a better chance of winning the nomination and perhaps even winning the governorship. Whether that's the case or not, I don't know. Of course, that'll depend a lot on who the Republican nominee is, and you rattled through a couple of the names in the Republican field. Obviously, we have the lieutenant governor and the attorney general and the secretary of state and the usual suspects who are all expected to either announce a bid or who are thinking about announcing a bid. So we'll have to see how all of that plays out, but it's very fascinating. This is something that political reporters here in the state really enjoy, sort of the parlor game of picking who's going to run, who's not going to run, who's going to be the front runner, who's going to take a back seat. I don't know whether voters are paying attention to all of this right now. My guess is that they're not. But again, it is something that is fun to watch if you're a political news junkie like we are. So we'll just keep an eye on it.
It was very interesting. This past weekend, the Little White House in Warm Springs, Georgia, near the community of Pine Mountain, was commemorating the 80th anniversary of the passing of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, which happened at the Little White House in Warm Springs. And Senator Raphael Warnock was the keynote speaker. And he is going through his recognizing of other elected officials and individuals who were in attendance. And he recognized all of Georgia's sitting legislators or lawmakers, elected officials who were there. And he also welcomed those who want to serve. That was his exact quotes, who want to serve. And former DeKalb CEO and state lawmaker Michael Thurmond was in attendance, as was State Senator Jason Estevez, a state senator here in Atlanta. Both of them have also possibly been mentioned as potential gubernatorial candidates on the Democratic side. Let's pivot also, just to wrap up this edition of Political Update on Atlanta News First. Let's talk about a name we haven't mentioned, and that is Stacey Abrams. Twice unsuccessful gubernatorial candidate, came very close, closer really than any Democrat in recent memory in 2018 to winning the governorship, essentially losing to Governor Brian Kemp, but really elevated her to a national platform, even to the point where she was chosen to give the 2009 Democrat response to President Trump's State of the Union address the following year. What's your take on Stacey Abrams right now? I haven't heard too much from her lately.
No, I don't. I haven't heard too much from her either. Of course, we know that the organization that she founded has come under a lot of legal scrutiny. She herself has not been charged with any wrongdoing, but certainly it is a bit of a political black eye, at least from a public relations standpoint, since she's been so closely affiliated with that group. The old adage, third time is the charm. Maybe a third run for the governor's race leads finally to a victory for her. I'm not so sure about that. I think that a lot of Georgia Democrats are probably going to be thinking, you know what, she's had a couple of chances at this, and while she certainly did very well, as you said, better than any other Democrat running for statewide office in quite some time, that maybe it's time to give somebody else a chance to see if they can finally get over the hump and win the governor's mansion, something the Democrats here in Georgia have not been able to do for a long time. So I think that she is part of the conversation, that she deserves to be part of the conversation when it comes to Democrats and the Democratic Party, the direction of the Democratic Party here in Georgia. But whether or not Democrats are going to be ready to sort of hand over the reins to another governor's race to her after two unsuccessful attempts remains to be seen.
Well, Georgia remains one of the most dynamic states in the United States for political development. Really, we're at the epicenter of the 2026 and also upcoming 2028 national presidential election. We'll continue to follow all of these topics here on Atlanta News First and atlantanewsfirst.com. A reminder, you can watch all of our podcasts on YouTube, Political Update, Behind the Investigation, Decatur Dish, and all of the other podcasts that we produce here at Atlanta News First and atlantanewsfirst.com. Also, download and listen to all of our podcasts on your favorite podcasting platform, be it Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, or wherever you download and listen to your podcast. For Rick Volbaum, I'm Tim Darnell for this edition of Political Update on Atlanta News First and atlantanewsfirst.com.